And good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Pardon me. Hope you had a safe and a pleasurable weekend. It was really cold. It was really windy, but it was not a bad weekend at all. Okay. And by the way, in case you did not know it, for those of you who knew him, I don't know if you're aware of the fact or not, but Max King, who was so incredibly instrumental in introducing covenant eschatology into the public consciousness of the modern church, with with his book Spirit of Prophecy, with his massive tome, The Cross and the Parousia. He passed away just day before yesterday, I guess it was. And, make no mistake, I did not, I did not at all agree with some of the conclusions that Max came to in his later years. But my experience with Max was he could be slightly frustrating, and I don't mean that in any kind of a negative way, but you could sit down with him and you could ask him Bible questions, and he very seldom gave you a direct answer. He would say, well, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on that passage? What does your research lead you to believe? And you're going, that's not what I asked. And so again, I'm not saying that in any kind of a negative sense. He wanted people to study. He wanted people to make up their own minds. And so that was ever so slightly frustrating, somewhat humorous. I don't know that I've ever met a more humble man. Now, you can agree or disagree with his theology, okay? That's not the point here. The point of it was that he was an extremely humble man. He was a man of very, very strong convictions, make no mistake, but he was a very humble man. And he knew what he was he knew the controversy that would be created when he presented his views. And he was vilified, ostracized, condemned, disfellowshipped. I never heard him utter an angry or bitter word. Now that says a lot. Says a lot of his spirit. And so, anyway, like I said, in case you didn't know it, for those of you who knew of or knew him, and it's certainly a sad time in some ways. And again, I don't care if you agree or disagree with his theology. That's not the point. If you knew the man, then you knew what a fine man that he was. And so you had to respect his courage. You had to respect his gentility. You had to respect his humility. It's just like I've said many, many, many times. Pardon me. Down through the years about Martin Luther. Now, mind you, Martin Luther was not an humble man. You can't read his writings and believe that he was an humble man. But Martin Luther was a man of incredible courage, a man of incredible convictions. To be willing to do what he did, knowing the price to be paid. And again, as I've said many, many times, I don't care if you agree or disagree with his theology. I don't agree with Martin Luther's theology very much at all. On the main, I disagree with the bulk of it. But I appreciate the man, Martin Luther. And I told a professor, I was in an interview with a professor at what was at the time called Oklahoma Baptist University in Shawnee, Oklahoma. I interviewed this particular professor who was a scholar on Martin Luther. And I made this comment to him. I said, to me, it doesn't matter on one level. Now, obviously, it matters a great deal to me in reality, but I made that comment. On one level, it doesn't matter to me if you agree or whether you disagree with Martin Luther. If you do not appreciate the man's courage, his convictions, his willingness to be vilified by everyone, to be put on trial for his life, not just to be fired, okay? No, not just to be, quote, disfellowshipped, unquote, but to be put on trial for his life. If you don't admire that courage, then your understanding of human nature needs some adjustment, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so again, thank you for joining me here on this morning's Morning Musings. I apologize, my allergies are just, they're raging. And I didn't take anything when I got up this morning at 3 o'clock. Didn't realize they were quite this bad. I gave you an assignment last Wednesday, for us to pick up our study. Now, we have been correlating and conflating Matthew 25:31 and following with 2 Peter chapter 3 and Isaiah 65. Why are we doing that? Well, because as I've stated, almost everyone agrees. There are exceptions, but not many. Almost everyone agrees that the coming of the Lord, the coming of the Son of Man, in Matthew 25:31 and following, is the day of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3. Now, look, I've heard people try to delineate between the coming of the Son of Man and the day of the Lord, and I have to tell you, that's really quite a futile attempt. There is no distinction. Just over the weekend, I was reading a little bit of an article in which this individual was trying to delineate between parousia, erchomai, epiphany, apocalypsis, etc. And I'm going, do people not even understand what synonyms are? Now, are there nuances of difference between erchomai and parousia? Yes. Erchomai is more of a verb. Parousia is a noun. But, hello, the parousia would be the result of the erchomai. The Lord would come, erchomai, and as a result of his coming, the verb, his presence would be with us. There are no sharp distinctions, ladies and gentlemen, to be able for a person to say, well, you know, Matthew 25, that's the coming of the Son of Man. But 2 Peter chapter 3, that's the day of the Lord. I don't know where we ever got the idea that the ancient writers could not use different terms to speak of the same event. I don't know where we ever got that idea. Well, I do actually. It's argumentum ad desperatum. Because when you can show the nature, the definition, the identity, for instance, from the Old Testament of the, quote, day of the Lord, that it was never an earth-burning, time-ending event, and you say, okay, that's what 2 Peter chapter 3 is all about, then all of a sudden they want to talk about the coming of the Son of Man. Oh, that's got to be a literal, physical coming of Christ out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man. And that, let me speak plainly, is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. But I digress. So last Wednesday, I asked you to read the entirety of Isaiah chapter 65, because here is Matthew 25:31 and following, is the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation. Virtually everyone agrees and admits to that. Okay? So Matthew 25:31 and following is the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation. Well, 2 Peter chapter 3 is the day of the Lord to bring in the new creation. Peter says, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. Okay, Peter said, according to his promise. What promise is that? It's Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65, along with chapter 66, is one of the very clearest Old Testament prophecies of the day of the Lord, even though the term is not used, but of the coming of the new heaven and the new earth. Now, I've said this before, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you will think seriously about it. If you cannot show definitively, absolutely, irrefutably, that the promise of the new heaven and new earth of 2 Peter chapter 3 is not the promise of the coming of the new heaven and new earth, at the coming of the Lord, even though the term is not used, in Isaiah chapter 65, that is absolutely 100% positive, definitive proof that the Lord came in AD 70 to create the new heaven and the new earth. And I have to digress for just a moment here. It's not really a digression. It's very, very significant. And I realize that I'm not getting into what I asked you to do last Wednesday, and that's to read the entirety of Isaiah 65. But this is important. Over the last several days, several videos, I've had this individual who has told me that I'm a false teacher, I'm a heretic, and I'm, doomed to hell, etc., by appealing to Isaiah 65, because after all, Isaiah 65 says new heaven and new earth, and earth means earth. There's no way it could be a reference to AD 70. Well, the same individual posted in one of his many posts that earth means earth, okay? But then he posted that the law, the old covenant law, passed away at the cross. Now, you got to catch the power of this, folks. Okay? Jesus said, until heaven and earth, catch that? Until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle of the law shall pass. Okay, the old law could not pass until heaven and earth passed. But earth means earth, physical earth, according to this individual. Therefore, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the old law until physical earth passes away. But wait a minute. This individual, and a whole lot like him, believes, are you ready for this? Do you catch the power of this? Believes the law of Moses passed away at the cross. Oh, wait. Heaven and earth has to pass for the law to pass. Heaven and earth is literal, physical heaven and earth. But wait, the law of Moses passed away at the cross. Therefore, literal, physical heaven and earth must have passed at the cross. Excuse me. Houston, we have a problem. Well, I don't. He does. This is the kind of problem you run into, ladies and gentlemen, when you don't allow the Bible to interpret itself. The heaven and earth that was to pass away in Isaiah 65 to bring in the new heaven and new earth. That old heaven, that old earth, Isaiah says, Yahweh says there, would not be remembered. Now, this individual says this is absolutely untrue. Sorry, it's not. The Lord said the former things, the former heaven and earth, it's an elliptical statement, shall not be remembered. Well, the word remembered there is from the Hebrew word zakar. And it means, it doesn't mean simple mental recall. We'll talk more about it later. It is a covenantal remembrance. In other words, the former heaven and earth had or would have covenantal significance, covenantal meaning. When it would pass, that covenantal meaning and definition would no longer exist. This individual says God never, ever, ever, ever said he would not remember. See, it's a good example of argumentum ad desperatum. Okay, so I had to share that with you a little bit, pardon me, as a lead-in to tomorrow, as we look directly at Matthew 25, 2 Peter 3, Isaiah 65, and this concept that Christ's coming in Matthew 25 would be to bring in the new creation. And Peter said the new creation would come in fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And that proves the new heaven and new earth came in AD 70. I will see you on the flip side.